Hello, History 150 class. I'm your instructor, Joel Jewin. And really kind of on a weekly basis, I'm going to be trying to put out a video that really sort of serves as my commentary and my responses to both your PowerPoint questions as well as your weekly discussion questions on the primary source documents. Really, this is going to kind of serve as, like I said, my way of commenting on the work that you turned into me. Typically, the way I'm going to be grading the PowerPoint questions is that as long as you give me the best answer that you can with the knowledge you have available, I'm going to go ahead and give you the points, 2 points per question. If you come up with the answer that you're still presenting some information, but perhaps you don't quite answer the question, or it's difficult for me to understand what you're trying to say, I'll probably give you 1 out of the 2 points. And if your answer is short of the 35 word limit, or for whatever reason you're just posting information that is not relevant or really not relevant or related to the topic, or is false, I'll probably give you 0 out of the 2 points for those. That being said, if you ever see 1 or 0 points on one of your grades and you're not sure why, go in. I'm going to send out with this email a link on how to check your feedback, because if I do deduct points, I will always leave feedback on your attempt. Now, if you get full points, I usually won't leave feedback for your particular attempt, and instead I'm really going to be focusing and relying upon these videos here to really kind of fill in any information that you may not have included in your responses, any information that might have been a little bit off, or just maybe kind of a partial answer, maybe you didn't have time to fill in the full answer, maybe I'm bringing up some things that perhaps you did not think about when you're going ahead with your own answers. So really on a weekly basis, I'm going to be going through, like I said, both the PowerPoint questions as well as the document exercise and document workshops, and kind of trying to fill in the gaps and the blanks and the questions that you might have about these particular questions. So let's start off with our PowerPoint questions for week number 1. PowerPoint question number 1, why might there have been more social equality in small groups of hunters and gatherers who were constantly moving than in later societies who lived in towns and cities? Pretty interesting question, and we have a lot of evidence to back up that this is pretty much the case. A lot of it comes from both archaeology as well as viewing kind of modern day hunter and gatherer societies that are still around within the world, and looking at them, kind of seeing how their social functions operate is pretty interesting, comparing it to more sedentary agricultural societies which we tend to live in today. A lot of you brought up some really good points for why this might have been. The fact that everyone kind of needed to chip in order to survive, that people would have to sort of get to know each other on a more personal level and respect each other when there was only 30 to 50 people in a group. All of these are very good points. There's a couple of main things that seem to be necessary when you're talking about social stratification or different levels of equality within a society. And the first one is wealth. The second aspect is some sort of separation within occupation. And pretty much in a hunter and gatherer society, which is pretty much constantly on the move, there's really no way for an individual to accumulate wealth. When you're moving around almost constantly, you're pretty much contained to what you can carry on your back. So therefore, you really can't get any kind of surplus built up. And surplus is the key to wealth, because without a surplus of food, of minerals, of trade goods, of something that holds value to a large amount of people, everyone's going to have generally the same amount of materials and the same amount of goods, even between your group and another group that you might come in contact with. There might be some differentiation, variation there, but everyone's going to be able to carry and maintain about the same amount of stuff, which makes it very difficult to have some people just having more control and having more items. Same thing in a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Everyone's pretty much doing the same kind of activities. They're following game, they're tracking prey, they're gathering different herbs, and that way that there's really not a lot of separation between what people do in their daily lives, and therefore there's not a lot of kind of occupational separation that, once more, is one of the things that kind of separates people within sort of the agricultural societies, which we're going to be studying later on in the semester. So those are a couple of the main reasons: lack of wealth and lack of diversification and occupation, which tends to make these smaller hunter and gatherer societies more equal than larger sedentary societies. When you start building up wealth, you start building up power usually goes along with it, and societies tend to then become much more unequal. Some people also did a really good job bringing up the idea of gender roles and what that might have impacted and the part that that played within the difference between hunter and gatherer societies as well as sedentary societies. And that's an excellent point. Typically what we see happening, and this is not true for every single culture, but in the vast majority of cultures, there's a direct tie between the equality between the genders and the amount of calories that both genders kind of procure for the group, or the amount of kind of food procurement that each of the genders is able to incorporate, or resource procurement. It doesn't have to be food necessarily, just resources in general that they bring into the group or into the family unit. And within hunter and gatherer societies, even though typically men do more of the hunting, women do more of the gathering, hunting is a lot more irregular, and gathering is a much more stable and is a much more kind of reliable food source in most situations. And typically women bring in more calories to the average diet of hunter and gatherer societies than do men, which might be another reason why there was a lot more equality among the sexes within these small hunting and gathering societies than in later sedentary agricultural societies, in which case women were oftentimes relegated to fulfill much more domestic roles, staying inside the house, raising children, and a lot, so not all cases, but in certain cases were kind of separated from the more public sphere. And that is perhaps another reason why there is more egalitarian and more equality in these smaller groups of hunters and gatherers than there are in larger, more modern sedentary agricultural societies. So some things to keep in mind and to think on. Oops, go ahead here. There we go. On to question number 2, looking at these cool cave paintings here and thinking about what the purpose might have been behind them. And you all came up with some really good, excellent explanations for these. It could be hunting guides. It could be a way to pass on history to subsequent generations. There could be a ritual purpose behind them. And all these are really good ideas. And, likely it's probably some sort of combination of the both, it's of all of these different answers. It's hard to say that one is necessarily more right or true than the others. The interesting about these cave paintings in particular, which come from southern France, is that they were found deep within cave systems, which is the only reason why they survived to this day, because there's pretty much no weathering which was able to occur because they were so deep within these caves. Which might give you some idea as far as their function. It seems like if there was something that people were going to be gathering around and viewing on a regular basis, they wouldn't be so inaccessible. So maybe there was something that did have more of a religious function to it, or something that would be only viewed once in a while. But we're lucky that they were put so deeply in these caves because they survived for us to see to this day. And that's something else that's kind of interesting to keep in mind, that likely there were groups all over the world at this point in time that were creating very similar kind of art to what we're seeing in these caves in southern France. It's not something that was likely just contained to that region. The big difference, though, is that because these particular paintings were placed so deep within caves, they're still around for us to find. Most other paintings that might have been just done on a rock surface or a rock wall would have been washed away and weathered and eroded throughout time, and are going to be much more hard for us to find today. But yeah, and pretty much almost all, hunter and gatherer societies, they probably found their own ways to make art, to pass on stories and knowledge to future generations. We as humans is something that we're really good at doing. And it's very likely that that played a part in a lot of these various hunting and gathering societies. But these cave paintings do kind of serve as an excellent viewpoint and an excellent example of probably something that was much more widespread around the world at this point in time. All right, moving on to question number 3. Given the advantages and disadvantages of agriculture, why do you think the practice became so widely adopted? Once more, you guys came up with some very excellent answers here. And a lot of your answers really kind of focused on the advantages that agriculture can give a group of people, whether it's providing the basis for a larger population, whether it is providing a group of people within that society more time where they don't have to necessarily spend it procuring resources and food for themselves, which allows them to find other ways to benefit the group, or whether it's just having a more kind of stable food supply that is kind of more reliable and does not cause the group to have to move quite a bit. And those are all very good answers. And I would say really kind of probably the primary and foremost one, particularly when these very earliest groups were focusing on the transition to agriculture through kind of the incipient cultivation process, was likely really based around the higher birth rates that a sedentary agricultural society was able to achieve. Just the fact that you're not constantly moving and that you have kind of more time for a woman while she's pregnant to have stable resources, as well as not having to move around a lot, seem to have an impact on more children being born. Populations, of course, began to rise based upon this. And that these, I think, just like humans, like all biological creatures, are primarily driven to reproduce themselves to one degree or another. So therefore, it's not overly surprising that a lifestyle which would help support bigger families, more children, and a larger population would be one that would become adopted. Also, once you become kind of reliant upon agriculture, it's really hard to go back. Without having a large percentage of your population starve. You can't suddenly go from a town of 300 to 400 people back to a group of 30 to 50 without having some fairly major ramifications. So kind of once the decision and once incipient cultivation turned into agriculture and various groups became reliant upon it, it was kind of self-fulfilling at that point in time. The groups need to continue to improve upon their agricultural acumen in order to continually support the larger and larger population numbers and levels that they were finding themselves with. So I think those are kind of some of the real important advantages that agriculture gave, and probably why it was adopted in so many places around the world. Also, when you think about a lot of the disadvantages that come along with agriculture, a lot of them aren't necessarily readily apparent when you first begin the practice. For example, the fact that it's going to eventually lead to increased hours working as opposed to hunting and gathering, in which case there's this kind of tendency for there to be less strenuous work, less debilitating work, and so forth. As well as the fact of things like, dental problems which come along with surviving on a lot of these grain-based diets, which sedentary agriculturalists kind of formed their larger populations around. You don't really see that right away. It's a lot easier to see a lot of the benefits of agriculture than a lot of the drawbacks. Also, you're not going to be worried about, kind of a large flood or natural disaster hitting you until it actually hits. By the time it does, you're either in kind of the position where you can sort of regroup with the large number of people you have left and go back to agriculture, or once more try to break off in those smaller 30 to 50 hunting and gatherer groups again. So once more, a lot of disadvantages not apparent right away, and a lot of the advantages, and once it's in place, it's kind of self-fulfilling and continues to grow out from there, as well as kind of the levels with which people interact with their local environments, which we'll be talking more about in the next question. One thing I would kind of steer away with for question number 3 to this answer is that maybe this idea that agriculture is somehow easier than hunting and gathering. Once more, this kind of goes back to the amount of work and time that is put into it. As time goes on, most societies up until the modern age were reliant upon a large percentage of their population engaging in agriculture in order to survive. And typically this agricultural work involved a lot more work, a lot longer hours than typical hunting and gathering bands had to put in. I think there's some studies out there that show that hunting and gathering groups can survive usually off of somewhere between like 24 to 30 hours of work a week, where typically in most agricultural societies that number is much, much higher, meaning that actually hunting and gatherer societies have a lot more leisure time and so forth within their individual groups. The big difference with sedentary agricultural societies, however, is that most of them find a way to have one particular group or one particular class of people be completely unreliant on having to find and procure food for themselves, and have another class of people, once more we're getting back to this idea of social stratification here, be responsible for growing, securing, and providing those resources and that food for this group of people, who then can completely sort of devote themselves to either running and ruling the society, or once more trying to find ways to sort of make society better. This is, kind of the idea you get into, where societies through this process can come up with more detailed religious and philosophical thought. Perhaps spend more time on looking at the past. Once writing is invented and developed, recording and looking at history, as well as going about trading and so forth, which we'll be much more into in the next question. So just some things to think about when it comes to the advantages and the disadvantages of agriculture, and probably why agriculture became so prevalent around the world, and despite kind of having some good things and some good aspects and some bad aspects to it as well. All right, question number 4. What link do you see between agriculture, sedentary village life, and trade? And once more, very similar to question number 3, a lot of people brought up this idea that once you rely on agriculture, it gives some people more time to intensify their kind of relationship with the natural environment, with technology, with developing new ways of life, new philosophies, new thoughts, and that kind of then sort of leads to this idea of trade and being able to share all those things with other groups around you, which very good points all around. Just kind of on a more even basic, simple level, you have to think that one of the big kind of key aspects to all this is the idea that people can be found in the same location multiple times. In a hunting and gathering group, you might occasionally run across another group, and you might have kind of seasonal migratory patterns of animals and plants that you're following, and kind of reliably come into contact with groups that way, but you're never going to be able to go to one location usually and always know someone's going to be there. And that's what sedentary village life, which is completely dependent upon agriculture, provides you with. This idea that one group of people are going to be in the same place pretty much all the time, and you know where to go if you want to trade and engage with them. Another big aspect on why this sedentary agricultural life leads towards trade is this idea that once you are, or a group of people are located in one particular environment and one particular region for a long period of time, they gain a very much more kind of detailed knowledge of that individual location and the natural resources that are around there, how to exploit and use those natural resources. And then that gives you the ability to go and find other places and other people, where they are, and take advantage of their knowledge of their local environment, their local resources. For example, perhaps one location is near a river and has really, really good clay in which to make pottery. Another location is kind of up in the mountains and has some deposits of obsidian to make really sharp, really strong obsidian knives. It doesn't take too much of a stretch of imagination to think that the group who can make really good pots wouldn't mind trading some pots to get some good knives, and the people who make the good obsidian knives, vice versa, right? So the entire idea that agriculture leads to sedentary village life, and sedentary village life leads to trade. Another big aspect, of course, that comes along of trade is not just this idea of trading goods, but it's also the idea of trading ideas, of trading philosophies, of trading beliefs, and that this really kind of impacts and influences societies as they grow and continue to contact surrounding groups and surrounding cultures and surrounding civilizations as we go through time in a very large and very dramatic way, as we'll see as we go throughout the class. So certainly some key things to think about for question number 4. All right, last but not least, question number 5. Why do you think agriculture developed in different locations all across the globe at roughly the same time? And no, the answer is not aliens. As fun as those crazy History Channel documentaries are on how aliens did everything for us in the past, unfortunately there is pretty much no actual evidence to support any of that. No, a much more kind of feasible solution, and a solution that a lot of people, an idea that a lot of people within the class here came up with, was this idea that when people are kind of faced with similar challenges, they tend to form similar solutions. Also, it's helpful at this point in time that this kind of process of global warming that was, a result from the end of the last ice age, combined, with a wetter temperature or wetter climate to allow for a lot of these kind of natural abundant plants which can be consumed by humans to grow in one location, making kind of this incipient cultivation where people, weren't necessarily reliant upon these relying on planting and growing these particular crops, but there were so many abundant crops in one area that they became sedentary, and in that way kind of dabbled with the kind of methods of planting and creating new and different kind of crops. And that sort of once the climate changed again, temperatures dropped, and pretty much the abundance was not there, that a lot of these groups found ways to keep on, learning from the incipient cultivation they had been practicing and pretty much turn it into agriculture to support these large groups that they had. And it seems like the same process was occurring in multiple places around the world at about the same time. Now, the idea of contact between these various groups is very interesting, and a lot of you brought this idea up too. And I would say in certain locations that makes a lot of sense and was certainly a very large part of this picture. In other locations, perhaps not so much. If we go ahead and take a look at our kind of map here of the various areas that agriculture began around the world, the various times it occurred, and so forth, it's easy to see that in areas such as in Western Asia, the Fertile Crescent, across Asia, that there was likely a lot of contact, communication between these various groups, and it's entirely possible that this idea of spreading the idea of agriculture from one group to another could have occurred. In other more remote locations, such as down in New Guinea or in the Americas, these are groups which likely had very little, if any, contact with the larger kind of Eurasian landmass, which means that these locations probably developed it more or less on their own, once more kind of in response to similar stresses, similar environmental circumstances, and so forth. That I think is kind of the main story. So although contact and sort of spreading it through trade or example or other methods could have played a part in certain locations, it probably was not the case in all locations, and that this kind of geographic kind of influence also had a pretty important impact as well. All right, well, that kind of concludes our PowerPoint questions for this week. Next week, I'll be sending out another video answering, or not necessarily answering, but giving my perspectives on the PowerPoint questions as well as then next week, of course, we'll be having our first document workshop, which is going to be due, our primary source workshop, and I'll be going through and looking at that in more detail as well. Thank you very much, and I hope this upcoming week is a great one for you. Goodbye.